time, above all, tells the truths that were hidden in the present, and with the present eventually becoming the past, you find out things you previously didn't know. So just a few short months ago, if you asked the majority of people about the Gaza Strip, you'd probably be answered with, "Oh, I didn't realize there was a new strip mall in town. Where's it at?" Today, however, this is far from the case. Going even further back to before February 22nd of 2022, if you asked the majority of people what the second strongest military force in the world was, the obvious answer would be Russia, or maybe possibly China, which is the obviously topic of today's video. But today we face the inverse of that. If you ask somebody what the largest military, economy, and political influence is, the near unanimous answer is the great and free United States of America, with, the sounds of eagles squawking and bombs going off in the background and jets flying overhead and whatnot. However, this is slowly shifting from a given to a topic of debate. You see, a rising power is seeking to regain its status as the world's one great power, as it had been for several thousands of years, preceding the 1800s or so, and the Industrial Revolution, that is, the PRC, or the People's Republic of China. For a bit of backstory, China has been around for thousands of years. It was known for its great prosperity and influence. It's known for innovations like papermaking, gunpowder, the compass potentially even, and obviously stuff like Confucianism and Taoism. And it was an empire for many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years, depending on how you slice it up. However, things very suddenly take a change around the late to mid 19th century, where the century of humiliation begins for China. This is a period marked by military defeats, internal turmoil, foreign interventions. Some of these examples are the Treaty of Nanking, which is the end of the First Opium War, the Treaty of Tianjin, which is the ending of the Second Opium War, the Sino-French War, another defeat, Sino-Japanese War, and, very notably, the Boxer Rebellion. The result of all of this is by the early 20th century, China is a fragmented and weakened state, with its economy in disarray and its military capabilities severely limited, and falling behind that of the Western powers. This period of humiliation and turmoil lays the groundwork for the rise of revolutionary movements, including the Xinhai Revolution of 1911, which leads to the overthrow of the Qing dynasty and the establishment of the Republic of China, and then eventually a further later rebellion, which causes the development of communism onto the mainland, and the Republic of China being moved to a small island just off of the coast, this island being called Taiwan. And yes, of course, all of this will be on the final exam, so I hope you're taking notes, especially that bit about Taiwan, because I promise you that will come up later. Now, all of this is what's commonly known as the century of humiliation under Chinese culture. This is a century marked by, as we've discussed earlier, China just getting thrashed about by all the other powers, and China's not a huge fan of this. China wants to become the one true power, as we've talked about earlier. It wants to become the global hegemon, despite what its defense white papers might suggest otherwise. And while China may not seek to exert its control over everyone else in the same way that maybe the United States does, it still does intend to return itself to the status of the one global superpower. And we have seen this as China's economy and government spending has risen over the past several decades. It has become the job of many analysts across a wide spectrum of studies to investigate China's current and future situation. Market predictions, regional and global security, geopolitical balance and stability, and many more factors have been and will continue to be influenced by China as it continues to grow and modernize. Today, we're going to look at China's current economic, military, and geopolitical situation, and then try and extrapolate to predict what China might look like in the coming decades to rise to the challenge of great power competition and securing its local interests and to solve the Taiwan question, as they've said it, and then we'll make a decision on what we think the future of China will look like. Now, however, it's time for the great disclaimer. As always, when discussing sources related to China, especially publicly released data not gathered from intelligence agencies of other nations, there is a great amount of skepticism that must be given to any data about China. Their data and sources are regularly known to be unreliable as a part of how their bureaucracy functions and is incentivized to inflate figures. So, without further ado, let's get straight into said data. China is the world's second largest economy in nominal terms, behind the United States. However, when you adjust for purchasing power parity, which accounts for the cost of living and other such factors, then China's economy is actually the largest. The country's economy has been growing rapidly since about the 1980s, with annual growth rates exceeding 6 to 8%, which is very high for even developing nations, much less for a country that's effectively developed like China is. Eventually, China is even predicted to outgrow the United States economy in the 2030s sometime, in nominal GDP terms as well, placing it in terms of economic power ahead of its main geostrategic rival. Additionally, the PRC has numerically the largest navy in the world, with an overall battle force of over 370 ships and submarines. This includes over 140 major surface combatants. These will be things like, obviously, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and other things of that nature that are actually large vessels that can go places and do things. You may have noticed, however, that there is an asterisk next to the words largest navy. This is because, although they have the most number of ships, their actual tonnage, or the displacement, which is how much all of the ships would weigh if you could place them on a scale, is not the largest. The US Navy is still the largest by a considerable margin. But it is, however, notable that they do intend to continue to grow their Navy, and compared to US Navy production numbers, they are actually larger and are eventually predicted to outgrow the US Navy and have more tonnage in total. Additionally, the PRC has repeatedly and increasingly frequently been overflying the Taiwanese ADIZ, or ADIZ, in recent years. This is effectively a zone within the sovereign airspace of the nation of Taiwan, where all aircraft must identify themselves to ensure the safety of Taiwan's air, land, and naval assets. Basically, it's saying a big old box in the sky saying, "Do not fly here," without telling me who you are, or you'll probably get shot down. The whole idea behind these overflights is to pressure the Taiwanese government into making concessions and testing their reaction times and capabilities. Effectively, they're civil war, and they want to be able to take them over. And an effective way of doing this is just pressuring them without having to actually invade them. However, it should be noted that China has also repeatedly said that it is not against using force if it needs to take over Taiwan and eventually reunite China. Which leads us into why exactly this whole thing is happening. Ever since the Chinese Civil War that resulted in the PRC and the ROC splitting, People's Republic of China, and the Republic of China splitting, there has been a constant back and forth battle between the two of them to eventually try to become one singular China, and this is a very serious mark on China's legitimacy, where if they constantly have another nation saying they're also China, it's hard for you to say, hey, I'm the one China, when there's clearly a second China chilling right there, which is why China seeks so strongly to take them over. Additionally, it is a stain on their reputation and a mark of the previous century of humiliation that they seek to remove. Another way China has been influencing foreign affairs and helping to grow its influence on the global stage is that it has been doing what's called the Belt and Road Initiative. This is effectively a project where China is giving out very large loans to many other countries that normally couldn't get loans from the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or anything like that to build these projects that are super helpful, a port, an interstate across their entire country to link these distant cities together and do amazing things for these developing countries, with the understanding that this will help their economies so much that there's no way they won't be able to repay these loans in the future, even if they are pretty expensive for a country of their size. The results of this, however, have been pretty effective, where many countries have now either given them ports or given them valuable infrastructure that they can use, loaning it to the PRC, or alternatively, they have become military allies with China, giving them military bases in their area, or additionally just generally helping them out in terms of international politics and in the UN. So overall, this has been a pretty effective effort by the PRC. While the current state of the PRC is one that looks good on paper, there is data, however, to suggest that it could find itself in an even stronger position in the future. It has performed recent deployment and plans for new aircraft carriers. Matter of fact, it actually is planned to come close to, although not eclipse, the US in terms of number of aircraft carriers, although they are much smaller, have much smaller air wings, much smaller ranges, and some of them are not nuclear. However, they will have more of them in the future. Additionally, China also now has over 500 operational nuclear warheads. Again, much smaller than the two big nuclear powers, and a lot of that is not on standard readiness, so it's also not exactly available at a drop of a dime. However, that number is still steadily increasing. Furthermore, the PRC's economy is slowly transitioning to one of a semi-developed nation. Instead of going on speedy, fast growth, as it has for the past 30 to 40 years with the Chinese miracle of economic growth, it has begun to shift into quality of growth, which should not only improve the development of the Chinese economic, cultural, and social goals, but also ensures the resistance to economic perturbations in the future. Say, for example, the world's dominant superpower decides that they don't get to do the whole global trading and naval shipping thing, which would cut off their imports and exports, which imports are 14.3% of their entire GDP, and exports 18.9%. Effectively, this means that if they decide to get into a conflict with some unnamed great naval power, a fair chunk of their economy just simply disappears overnight, which is why they're trying to improve that issue, just in case it were to happen. Additionally, as the PLAN, or People's Liberation Army Navy, which is the Chinese Navy, has continued to increase in size, it has transitioned towards large auxiliary ships, so things that can go long distances, go into the open ocean, and then do whatever it needs to do. A large chunk of this is what's called ro-ro ferries, which are roll-on, roll-off vessels. These are effectively aircraft carriers, but for like tanks and trucks and stuff. They're just two decks where you put a bunch of cars on them, they get sent somewhere, and then they roll right off. You can literally start the engine and roll them off onto the beach wherever you happen to be.
This gives them a way to quickly invade, for example, nondescript island nations with overwhelming force. Not that they would ever, of course, do this, but just in case, purely hypothetically. Additionally, the Chinese arms export market has slowly been growing over time, to the point where it is now a larger export market than that of Russia, which was the large export rival for the United States for decades. This has largely come as China has not only innovated and stolen other designs from other countries, but also has been able to produce larger and larger volumes of technology and weapons and equipment, letting it have control over smaller nations and keep them as allies as they are reliant on China for their arms so they can defend themselves in case something happens. While this overall does paint a pretty good picture for the PRC, this is not the whole story. Since the arrival of the COVID-19 epidemic starting in late 2019 in the PRC, there has been an increasing concern about China's future prospects among an already mounting pile of concerns. China's economic growth and the Chinese miracle were expected to end or greatly slow in the mid-20s due to demographic changes as its working population aged. And the children born of the one-child policy began to make up a more considerable chunk of both the current and aftershock workforce. This is effectively the workforce that's aged 30 to 40 and then the workforce that's just coming into their 20s. The reason why this is important is if you have very few people working because your parents are only allowed to have one child, there's very few people in the workforce, but suddenly you now have two parents, both of which are growing old and need some sort of government sustainability and sustenance to be able to survive and get by, which has to be entirely supplied by this much smaller workforce. So now you have more people that need something and less people able to provide it, meaning you have less surplus production to spread out across the military and the economy in general. Another compounding issue is the BRI, or Belt and Road Initiative, as it has seen spiraling debt. Basically, a large chunk of these countries got gifted these loans from China because the IMF and other large international banks wouldn't give them money because they weren't reliable. Shocker, unreliable people are unreliable, and so a large amount of these loans simply have not been repaid. So China has lost a ton of money on this, and then seeking to reclaim these infrastructure projects, so that way they at least get something out of it. And so now they're taking land from these poorer countries, making them into these debts they can't repay, and in general this makes them look pretty bad to a lot of these countries, and has cost them $78 billion. You would think the issues with it ends there, however it doesn't. The thing is that rather than just give this country the money and have them figure it out to build it so they can have their own labor force built up, a lot of the workers are imported Chinese workers that are all sent overseas to go work on this project, working for Chinese companies. So all of the money finds its way back into Chinese pockets, so it's even harder for these countries to repay it, making it look like China is just inserting itself into other countries where it doesn't belong, just to take advantage of them. Not only has China suffered from serious and multiple international failures and issues with public face, there also have been many, many economic issues at home. The first and foremost of these is the spiraling debt issue, both in the housing market and in cities and local states having way, way, way too much debt. There is a housing bubble that would put the 2008 housing bubble to shame happening in China right now, that has been slowly inflating as people have been buying houses as a stock asset that's supposed to get more and more valuable over time, rather than as an actual house, meaning there are becoming more and more homes, and there's not enough people that need to go into these. Meaning this housing bubble has only grown larger and larger, and at some point has to pop. When this happens, this would be a great and very large hit to the Chinese economy, and may even cascade abroad into economic partners with China. Furthermore, on the point of local and citywide debts, a lot of the cities you may know and recognize in China, like Shanghai and Bangkok, tend to have very, very high debt ratios, to the point where there's more debt than there is GDP generated by the entire state for 2 full years. Meaning they would have to take every single penny of export and generated value, sell all of it, and pay all of it off onto their debts, just to pay off their debts in a couple of years. While all this has been happening, the, quote, fight against separatists is becoming more acute, as in past years the Taiwan authorities, led by the Democratic Progressive Party, stubbornly stick to Taiwanese independence, increasing cross-state relations as they refuse to recognize the 1992 consensus, which embodies the One China principle. This effectively stated that Taiwan would eventually seek to reunite with the PRC if an agreeable settlement could be found, with the perceived betrayal of this agreement being a casus belli for the Chinese government. The situation is only being worsened as tensions have risen between the US and the PRC, with increasingly frequent and large shipments of American aid to Taiwan, but furthermore has also been increasingly useful types of aid. In the past, it may have just been medical supplies or helmets, and then it was javelins and anti-tank missiles and smaller armaments like that. Nowadays, it's things like full ships, tanks, helicopters, jets, and things like this that are large ticket items for Taiwan that have increasingly increased tensions, but also made China more and more afraid that Taiwan will actually be able to put up a decent resistance on its own. Moreover, recently, since the Trump presidency, U.S. sanctions on Chinese goods and technology have escalated, which compounded with the gap between itself and rival developed states closing, the defense and intelligence apparatuses of these nations continuing to spool up, and Chinese technological, military, and industrial benefits will more and more regularly have to be made of its own innovation, rather than espionage, which its economy and military industrial base is simply not built for. To build off of that, we have to talk about matters of scale and consequence. The PRC may outnumber the US Navy, and it may eventually have more tonnage. However, there are two factors that we must take into consideration. The first and most glaring one is that the United States is a global superpower that has been around for far, far longer than the PRC in this status, and thus it has friends. NATO, AUKUS, and one-off friendships are what takes the American global reach from just a big spender to being absolutely dominant. The second big topic is that the types of military that the PRC has built versus that of the US. The United States has built its Navy to be one of global influence, capable of any operation, anywhere, at any time, while still succeeding in its mission. Furthermore, its ground and air arms are built in much the same fashion, with the American ground forces having a larger logistical capacity than any other nation on Earth has ever had, and the United States Air Force being remarkably well known for its ability to turn things the Pentagon doesn't like into craters from 1,000 miles away. This is in stark contrast to the PLA and its associated branches, which are effectively made to do one thing: take Taiwan. While the United States Navy is projected to have about a dozen of its large, globally influential carrier strike groups soon, with each having more firepower than most nations, the People Liberation Army Navy is mostly smaller coastal or only short-range vessels that simply can't go anywhere outside of the vicinity of the Chinese mainland, much less complete globally. So in total, while the PRC and its associated military and economic arms of geopolitical influence adapt to the goal of becoming a superpower, it also has many barriers standing in the way that prevent it from achieving its goal. The development of new and growing defense industries and a booming economy have helped catapult China onto the world stage, while foreign investment has helped it build a worldwide influence. On the other hand, an aging population, economic challenges, and the spooling up of the defense industrial base of most other Western nations has made it much harder for China to actually become a contender and a champion rather than just a new superpower on the block, with additionally its economic and societal issues meaning that the future of the Chinese economy is a mystery to both politicians and analysts alike. So, while China has all of the makings of a new superpower, it simply is unlikely that it will become the new global hegemon, nor be capable of having the same global reach and power the US has in the foreseeable future. Now, before we finish this off, I just wanted to make some final notes and some thank yous. I wanted to say a huge thank you to my English professor, obviously, for getting me into this project and having me actually complete this and finish this up and actually publish this as a completed work. Additionally, I wanted to thank Perun, a YouTube channel that I really enjoy the video of, for inspiring me into making this little presentation that I've made here for today for you all. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the little lesson I gave out today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you enjoyed what I liked, feel free to, give a like, share it with friends or whatever, and generally just have a nice day.